try to speak loud enough so everybody can hear me. One thing I wanted to say is as I was coming in, I noticed on the news that a woman climbed a pole in South Carolina and ripped down the Confederate flag. Yeah, she climbed it by herself. She was a black woman in her 30s, I think. But her name was Bree Newsom, and I thought it was kind of like a superhero move, so she probably, acknowledged that was kind of cool.
Right.
She's under arrest, but there's a big movement to get her unarrested, and they've also put the flag back up already. But still, it was a nice symbolic act.
Yeah.
I think that was very cool, so just wanted to note that before I started. All right, so Humanist Economics. I came to this subject because one of the things I think we're not talking about among humanism is economics. When I looked through all the literature I could find, I found one book on Humanist Economics that came out just before the big crash, like 2002 or so it came out. There hasn't been a lot of stuff written about it since then. In general, humanists tend to be to the right or to the left on economic issues. They tend to be libertarians, or they tend to be more in the democratic socialist tradition somewhere. And those two views are not super in line with each other. But when we look at the history of humanism, and especially going by the Humanist manifestos, we see that from the beginning of at least the humanist movement in America, 1932, the Humanist manifestos were the statements, and these are the parts of the Humanist manifestos that talk about economics. I've got all three of them here. And you'll notice if you read through this that they're looking at a radical change in methods, control, motives, that kind of stuff. When they're writing this during the Depression, they're seeing capitalism as kind of a failed, or at least very much in need of reform. And so they really thought, they were thinking in different terms. Now some of the people who signed this manifesto, and I don't have the names in front of me, but they were actual socialists themselves. They even used a socialized and cooperative economic order that must be established. So let's jump ahead. So the next time we go to the Humanist Manifesto, when they revised it, they did so in 1973, and you'll notice again that they're talking about we must extend democracy in its true form or true sense to the economy. They're looking, even then, they're looking at social, political, economic democracy is what they were talking about. And this is again the roots of humanism, I think. What we're talking about. And I'll get into why this is important in a minute. More from the same one. What it says here, democratize the economy and judge it by its responsiveness to human needs. This is important because the way the economy works right now, if we think of it in terms of free market economics, that's the human responsiveness to human needs is thought to be built into the system. That's how free markets work, right? It maximizes, everybody basically works hard, and the goods of society go to everybody depending on how hard they work, how well they work, whatever's happening. Under a perfect free market condition, say people on a libertarian world, there would be no poverty. Everybody would just get paid what they earn. Everybody would live this way. Over the years, of course, they've moved away from that, and they start talking about how there should be a small amount of unemployment all the time, things like this. But without getting too much into the theory, what humanism wants to do is democratize the economy. We would have a vote. We would be participating in the economy the same way we participate in our politics. What that would look like, I'm not exactly sure what it would look like. So I'm not trying to front for any kind of ideology here. I'm just looking at what this says, where the flaws are in the system, and trying to point to what we might do better or differently. Notice also, world poverty must cease. Extreme disproportions in wealth in the economy should be reduced. Right now, currently, we have the greatest amount of any economic inequality in history. The robber barons in the late 1800s didn't come close to what is going on right now, and there's less of a will to confront it now than there was in the 1890s and pre-Depression times. So now we jump forward to the Humanist Manifesto 3. In this time period, it was a whole different world. Now, in the last few years before this comes out, communism has failed, so a lot of people say socialism has failed. They started to rethink the end of history, Marx's end of history, as maybe the end of history happened under capitalism, not under socialism or under communism. What the Humanist Manifesto says about economics is this only. This is it. Support a just distribution of nature's resources. A just distribution satisfies both sides of that coin I explained earlier, the libertarian side or the socialist side, right? Both claim to have a just distribution. It kind of splits in the middle and says, it doesn't talk about poverty. We've lowered our expectations. We're not talking about eradicating poverty anymore. We're talking about as many as possible can enjoy a good life. Now, so that means some people might not enjoy a good life under this new system. I know some of the people who wrote this Humanist Manifesto, and I asked them very gently about this, and it was done by a committee. There was a lot of pressure, but I also think there was also this idea at the time that it was decided. We lived in the greatest economic expansion in history, 2003, right? Just before the crash. Here we are on the verge of this. It looked like nothing was ever going to change for everybody. This comes out, and then the next thing you know, there's a huge economic crash and we're in a great recession. I think, it's time anyway to start re-examining maybe where we are economically now, to try to re-examine what it means to be a humanist in the world of post-Manifesto 3, and maybe look back at our roots a little bit. I went back to this because, I just wanted to contrast that to the outside here. Contrast it to Humanist Manifesto 2. You can see how we just kind of lowered our expectations a little bit. And I think it's too bad. So let me keep going here. All right, so let's go into economics itself. We have this macroeconomic system we learn in college. Some of us learn in college. We take that class macro, we have microeconomics. When we go into macroeconomics, we get a definition of economics that says it's basically the examination of the distribution of scarce resources, right? And so usually we don't think of things like air as a scarce resource. We don't think of water necessarily in most societies as a scarce resource, but both of those things are becoming scarce now through things like air pollution and things like water shortages, which are coming or have come in so many places. Many people don't remember that when Occupy Wall Street was first thought of, this is like one of the first posters. This came in a magazine, and it was one of the first posters that said, we're going to occupy Wall Street, September 17th. And the reason I picked Wall Street was because it was a critique of the economic system as it exists, as it was at the time. So we're moving forward in time. We're hitting, people are very unhappy with the way things are going economically. What is their one demand? Their one demand was that the Wall Street bankers not be bailed out, that they pay for the crimes, I'll put that in finger quotes, of the Great Recession. And in the same issue that came out, or maybe a month or two later, this comes out. Now, this author is really, really interesting. He's, I lost him. Hold on, sorry. David Orwell. He's a writer. He wrote a book talking about the problems in modern economics, how the scientific basis of what we think of in macroeconomics isn't really real. And he asked a series of questions in this article. This article came out just around or just before his book came out. Let's get that one out. Right. How does the physics department feel about economic laws, ideas, masquerading as laws of nature? We go back in time to Adam Smith. Okay, Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. Maybe have some on that. Well, I'll get to that now. Adam Smith writes The Wealth of Nations, and he bases his book on Isaac Newton. Newton had just written his big Principia. Adam Smith says, I want to examine economics in the same way. Well, he's kind of coining the term economics at the time. I think it was called something else. There was another word for it, an older term. But in that, he tried to come up with the kind of models that Newton had for orbital mechanics, for the way the physics works, right? He's coming up with these ideas. How does economics relate to physics? He wants it to be physics. But it's not physics, right? It's a complex system. Physics is also a complex system, but it works on a limited way. If you want to shoot a cannonball, you can basically know where the cannonball's going to land in a vacuum under perfect conditions. But chaos complexity, these things hadn't really been developed at this time. You know, Adam Smith and Isaac Newton had no idea. Newton, when he was working on the orbit of Mercury, for instance, he didn't know about Einstein and relativity and everything. So he thought every once in a while when Mercury got in place, God would just sort of reach in and tweak it a little bit, make it work. Because he had no way of his math to describe relativity, because he was running up against the kind of complexity, the kind of unexpected things that we run into. Same with a cannonball being shot. You put in a certain amount of force, cannonball goes a certain distance. But in the real world, there's all sorts of things that we might not be able to predict. The inside of the cannon barrel might be wrong. The ball might not be the right weight. It could be loaded wrong, the wrong amount of stuff. These things add complexity to the ideas, and modern economics doesn't deal with any of those things. Well, modern economics has started to deal with it, but classical economics doesn't deal with any of those things. What classical economics says is that there is this perfect system of free market that works. We have homo economist, we call him, which is this perfect person who works within the system, and we keep going. The other questions that Oral asked: what do mechanical engineers think of safety margin used by financial engineers? If you were going to build a jet engine for a plane, it would be tested and retested. The FAA would go through, and you would know how it works in wind tunnels. You would know how it works with the structure. You would not mount that to a plane, put a bunch of passengers on that, and fly it across the country. However, when financial engineers come up with a new thing, like the mortgage-backed securities, they sell them. Who examines that? Who's looking at, who does the testing? Who does the thought experiments behind this? Did anybody realize that this relatively innocuous and very little understood financial idea was going to completely destroy our economy? Most people didn't know this. There may have been a few people who talked about it, and some of those people who knew about it profited immensely. But for the most part, we don't have this kind of safety. We don't have an FAA for financial securities world to the extent that it has the same amount of power, right? We have these financial regulators, but do they have the power to really do it? What is the safety margin used by financial engineers? What about the mathematical assumptions that are used? These scientific, these rigorous. When we talk about economics, we have all these formulas, we have all these numbers, and it looks very much like science. And a lot of it balances. If you think of it as just a count spreadsheet, most of us can understand the math behind that. But in reality, when we talk about millions of people making microeconomic decisions on a day-to-day basis in a way that all aggregates into what we think of as our economy, and then we think about very, very powerful banks making deals back and forth, or 0% interest, or whatever the interest is, and you start putting all that in, you understand really quickly it's a complex system that cannot be predicted. The same way we can't predict an earthquake, the same mathematical reasons is why we can't predict recessions or depressions, because they're not predictable. We know one might be coming, we might know that one is coming, but we can't tell you when, we can't tell you how deep. It's all on a chart. Markets. Can markets make ethical decisions? If the free market is what we're thinking it is the free market allows us to best divide up the resources, the scarce resources of the world, among us, is that an ethical thing? Is that an automatic system? Can an automatic system make an ethical decision, or is it a naturalistic fallacy? Right? Is the natural system, the free market is a natural system, and we just assume the natural system is the ethical thing? That's definitely the naturalistic fallacy. Maybe there's ways to improve these. This is what we do as humans, right? If there's a natural system out there, we look at, like, tomatoes growing in a field. We say, those tomatoes are pretty good. I'm going to replant them and make more tomatoes. In economics, we say, no, those are pretty good. If you happen to discover them out in the world, you should definitely grab them. But there's no idea that maybe we can alter the economic system to make it work better for people. Or there are those ideas, but that's not popular among the people who make the big economic decisions in the world today. Is economics politically neutral? That's another good question. What happens right now is that we have, maybe you've been following the TPP, or maybe not, but we just passed this gigantic trade bill. Was that a politically neutral idea, like some of the proponents are saying, that treats all these countries equally? Or is there a political bias for or against, let's say, corporations, or for people, or for one country over another, or for one block of countries over another, which is exactly why we passed it, really, is that we're looking to, we're fighting against the Soviets in their little thing. So, let's get to it. Okay, so, This famous line here for Wealth of Nations is from Adam Smith. And this is what people love to talk about when they talk about Adam Smith. And this is why they talk about, this is where we get the idea of greed is good, or where economics is about maximizing our self-interest. But we don't know about this book here. This is from his other great Theory of Moral Sentiments. And he was not, in fact, Adam Smith was not, in fact, actually a person who was talking about greed is good. He did not think that we should, that rich people were deserving of their riches. In fact, if you think about his invisible hand in the marketplace that regulates that marketplace, that invisible hand is the same invisible hand that Newton relied on to realign the orbit of Mercury. He saw the invisible hand as sort of like the hand of God, who, when the system gets a little bit inchoate, he moves in and kind of evens it out, so everybody gets what they deserve. But it's a moral. His ideas were of moral ideas, scientific as they could be at the time. But certainly, we didn't rest with Newton and stop developing physics. And we really should think maybe we should stop with Smith or with some of his later developers. We don't stop there when we develop our economic theories. But for the most part, we did. For many, many years we did. There's a complicated history that I'm not going to go into right now. This picture of Adam Smith, this quote, not photograph. Here we go. All right. What we're looking at here is the GDP. And what we can see here is across, the United States, China. This is a little old, so this might be very different right now. China might be higher. This is 2012, I think. But the general idea here is this is how we chart economics in the world. When we think of economics, we say which country is richer, what's the standard of living for people who live there. Oftentimes we'll say America is the richest country in the world. We have the richest people in the world. And look, here's the chart that proves it. We are $15 trillion, and there's China and Great Britain's down there somewhere. This is what United Kingdom. This is how we measure it. But is that really the measure for how people live? Is that really a number that tells us anything about the people who live in that country? We're the richest country in the world, but theoretically, all that $15.1 trillion could go to one person. Everybody else could be not making it. We don't know. That doesn't tell us how people live. So we wonder, as this will say, right? We think about what does GDP mean, and it doesn't really tell us about all these things. A higher percentage of children live in poverty here than in any other industrialized country. Women and communities of color are poorest. Maternal mortality rate has doubled in the past 25 years. This doesn't sound like the GDP is telling us much about the way people live in the world. And it also doesn't sound like this is a moral system, at least from the point of view of, if we're going to critique economics. And I want to say this is a gentle critique of economics because I'm not advocating for an ideology necessarily. I have some ideas in this, but I'm trying to keep it ideology free and really just talk about what does humanism say about economics and what does economics say about itself. And here's some evidence that that's not the case. Now this comes from a website called caringeconomy.org, and this was started by a woman named Marianne Eisler. I don't know if you know her book, but it's called The Real Wealth of Nations, so I'll get into that. Here it is. Good. Doing all right. So what she says is that caring economics takes into account the full spectrum of economic activities, from life-sustaining activities of the household to life-enriching activities of caregivers and communities of all types. One thing that happens when you look at GDP, this is very interesting, not immediately obvious until somebody says it. I didn't catch it at all. When we have a plane crash, that counts for our GDP. Because all the people who go in to clean up that plane crash, all the insurance money that's paid out, all the money we spend on examining it, the people who are paid to go in, all that money is spent. That's a positive net thing. Now, it's not positive because a lot of people die, but that's when we clean up a Superfund site. That's a positive for the GDP. That adds a plus to the number we spend in our economy. So we talk about there's a Superfund site that's filled with toxic chemicals. Every truck that we pay to go in there and tow it to some mine shaft up in Maine or something and dump it all that stuff underground because we don't know what to do with it. all that cleaning counts for our GDP. So every time we build an atomic bomb, that's for our GDP. Every time we do something good or bad, every time we, so what she's trying to say is maybe there's a caring economy. Maybe we should stop looking at how economics works. We talk about what is a positive net good. Instead of saying we built a prison, and that's a positive, we have for-profit prisons now, and that goes into our GDP, and therefore we have companies that actually campaign for stricter laws, longer sentences, and will actually sue cities that don't provide enough criminals to fill their jails. This is, seriously, that's happening. That's not even made up. This is all counts for our GDP. So America, right now with that high GDP, part of that comes into the fact that we have people who are building for-profit jails, that we're selling weapons overseas, that we're selling these, or even if you develop biological weapons, that would be a positive in your GDP. And she's saying, how about we turn that around to say those are not positives on our GDP? And in fact, why don't we come up with a way of reading economics that has nothing to do with GDP? And instead, this. Imagine a world where economic systems, I think she said it, but in this world, the most valuable work is the work of caring for people. And so we would be building systems that instead of war would not be counted. The negative parts of what we could consider widely anti-human issues, we could get rid of those from at least our GDP and start monitoring in other ways. I'll go on in a little bit. So she developed this idea called social wealth economic indicators. This is also on the caringeconomy.org website. I would recommend her book. It's very interesting. I think it's a little overwritten. You can get most of the information you need off the website, really, but the ideas here are this. When we use these to measure how countries do, when we think about this, that's how we get this idea that like some of the Scandinavian countries are doing so much better than America on certain indicators, right? When we say, well, the GDPs, we look at GDP chart, they're way down the middle, 2 billion, 3 billion. Maybe Sweden does a lot of exports of weapons, they do a little better. But for the most part, if we look at how are people doing, we have a different way of measuring the economy that escapes, I think, some of the problems of the earlier free market stuff as well. Now, I understand how people feel about free markets, and I understand what they want. I think there's a value to markets, by the way. I think there are markets that determine an awful lot of good things. I think, for instance, it would be hard to think of socialized movies. When we choose what movies to go to, what we want to see, there's an advantage there for us to be able to pick and choose among those different options, and people can cater to people's tastes. And I think there's an important aspect to markets for that idea. But I also think there's an important idea that maybe we don't need to, well, we'll see, I'll do one. All right, then we get to climate. Naomi Klein is very much I think she's a socialist. I think she would probably be comfortable with that term. I'm not sure I heard her say that per se, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. But when she talks about the climate, she puts it in very stark terms. Capitalism versus the climate. Right now, we are looking at oil still coming out. We know there's enough oil. If we keep all the oil in the ground that's in the ground, we might be able to avert that 2-degree, 3-degree rise in temperatures that people want to avoid. If we take it out, and 4/5 of that is already owned by oil companies that expect to pull it up in our lifetimes and pull it out, it's way more than we can take. Again, as humanists, we have to kind of go where the science leads us, and the science is telling us that our addiction to oil, our addiction to these things is going to basically seriously hurt the planet. Again, from a GDP point of view, that's not necessarily a negative, right? When you talk to somebody who's just reading GDP, they'll say, well, this gives you a chance to basically move the population north. And that builds jobs. That is money being spent. That means all the people who have to move from the equatorial zones to Canada, right? That's money being made. That's contributing to, and I would argue that that's not an indicator that when people say, well, this is just going to, like, I've heard that the Soviet Union is looking forward to the North Sea opening up, right? When that ice melts, they're going to have an ocean up there to exploit. There's going to be more oil there they can get that they can't get to now. There'll be fishing up there that we can't access now. There are forces in Russia that are working to basically buy up the land that's going to be revealed, or not the land, but the water that's going to be revealed by this water disappearing up there. So That's another, all right. So, I really have to ask, can free markets tackle climate change? And when we talk about that, I go back to this. Climate change wasn't really on the agenda in 1979, but Milton Friedman was asked about, Milton Friedman, by the way, is one of the chief libertarian, he's the guy, actually, for libertarian economic thought. And here he is talking about the way governments can intervene by imposing taxes on pollutants emitted by cars to make incentive for car manufacturers to limit pollution. Now, I don't think that if he were to buy the reality, if he were alive today and he admitted to the existence of climate change, I think he would understand, he would have to use at least some of this logic and apply it to climate change. And so you can see that his idea would be to tax pollutants and use, or the people who are affecting climate change. So he would effectively be in favor of a very large tax on fossil fuels, if I had to put words in his mouth after his death and guess at it. But I think this is a very interesting thing, because when we talk to people who are in free markets today, they would say no government intervention in markets. Yet the person who invented that concept in 1979 was very, very comfortable with this idea, very comfortable with the idea of controlling pollution, controlling externalities, what we call negative externalities of free market systems. Going on. So this is what Naomi Klein talks about. She says we've been told that the market will save us. But I feel that, I'm open to questions, and when I'm all done, please hit me, because I really want to develop this more. I'm really at the beginning stages of a lot of this. So if you have ideas or insights, just let me know. But she would say that we need to reinvent the economy from the ground up. She would like to say we have to trash the system. She may or may not be right. In one way or the other, though, the system is going, if the worst parts of climate change come true, then the system is going to crash in one way or the other. It's just a matter of how we want to do it. If we want to do it to the benefit of everybody, or to the benefit of only very few who come out the other side and survive it. I think here she kind of expresses that same idea. And all right, so Humanist Economics. If I'm going too fast, just let me know if I get excited. I just wanted to read this here, because I think this is about the best statement we have on what Humanist Economics would look like, especially testing results in terms of economic good, responsiveness to human needs. Right now, I don't think we have an economy or an economic system that responds well to our needs. I don't think it's scientific. I don't think it's reasonable, and I don't think it's compassionate. And I think some of the key elements of humanism is that we are compassionate and reason. And if you can show that economics as it is right now is unreasonable, and if you can say it's not compassionate, then you've got two really big ideas that the present economic system is not humanist in itself. It doesn't meet our humanist ideals. This is not something I hear many humans saying, so I'm taking it upon myself to say it. Maybe there's like 2 or 3 people who say it. I'll provide some stuff about that. David Holscher is one of the humanists who is saying this. He wrote a thing a few years ago on what he called atheism and the class problem, and he talked about ideas on how to basically reinvent the system in a way that Naomi Klein would appreciate. David Holscher is also a socialist in a more stark way. Again, I don't necessarily consider myself a socialist in this way, maybe more of a democratic socialist, but I'm not sure where I stand on this. And again, I'm still developing my ideas on this, but I do want to show the kind of thinking that would go into really tackling the systems, and there's a lot. There's doubling the minimum wage, repeal of NAFTA, here's more. Reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, right? That was one of the main causes of the last big recession. Large budget increases for federal agencies charged with catching white-collar criminals. This is another thing. The FAA, right? They can go in and they can examine a plane anytime. They can stop a plane from flying. But our government can't really stop banks from loaning unless we go in with a whole bunch of lawyers and rafts of reasons and ideas. Maybe if we erred on the side of caution, we would stop things like that. He would talk about, a nice peace neck, like maybe 2/3 reduction of the military budget. You know that the United States has 11 carrier groups that patrol the borders in the world. the nation with the next largest is tied by a bunch of them who only have one. No nation has, but America has more than one carrier group, and America has 11. That seems like a lot for a country that's supported by 2 or 3 oceans tops, right? We have Pacific, Atlantic, maybe we can argue for Hawaii, China Sea, and that would be 3, but we have 11. Why do we have one in the Mediterranean, for instance? Right? So it's something to think about. Elimination of every form of corporate welfare. I'm all for that. I mean, right now in Rhode Island, we're fighting a minor league baseball stadium. They want to build in the capital city. They wanted $120 million from the state in the same year that we're cutting Medicaid and we're having infrastructure repair problems. We can't get money to repair our infrastructure. The bridge is collapsing. But they want us to give them $120 million to build a minor league baseball stadium in downtown Providence. It's just insanity. Why would we even, we do, 95%, according to one poll of this state is against this. There's still an open question as to whether or not it's going to happen. We're going to have a special session in fall to deal with this idea. Ending of all government subsidies of religion. I'm all for that. That's very much. Elimination of poverty. Ending the war on drugs. Wealth tax. Sam Harris suggested this. A wealth tax that he said that we just go in and we take a one-time wealth tax of all the richest people in the world. It takes something like 25% or 50% of their wealth right away. Just take it. I mean, I thought that was kind of crazy. It never happened. I think one of the reasons he suggested this would never happened. But I don't know. I read that piece and I was like, wow, it's just crazy. So talk about I want to talk about ideology for a while. This is Tim Worstel. He writes for Forbes. Is that Forbes? Sure. Might be Forbes. Anyway, he writes for Forbes. In this, he's got this idea. He says, the fight for 15, be careful for what you ask for, because you might get it. And he's saying that if we gave people $15 minimum wage, it would be terrible for the economy. Not that there's any study that you could find. He admits in his piece, there is no study he could find that says that, in fact, almost every study you could find says it would be good for the economy. But his ideology, he's a free market, Friedman-esque libertarian, says it will be. So it's going to happen. All science tells him one thing, his ideology tells him another, and he is comfortable enough to go and write a major piece online for Forbes that says this is going to happen, even though there's no indication that it will. Right? So that's the ideology we're up against. Here's a guy who, and this is the type of stuff that people in the business world read all the time. I'm constantly being told that even slight raises in minimum wage, like Rhode Island just did 60 cents, $9 to $9.60. And I'm told about the economic catastrophe that will happen from this. That 60 cents is not going to cause a problem. A bigger increase over time is not going to cause a problem. All reports actually show this. There's been 11 or 12 reports. The Department of Labor has a report. I have a bunch of links to these I can supply if you want to ask me. But here's a guy who says, no, but my ideology says it's coming and it's going to happen. I think that's kind of crazy. The idea of reinventing economics from the top, from the bottom up or from the top down. There's this group that, in response to David Orwell's piece way back that we talked about earlier, where he asked all those interesting questions about economics, people started to think, how do we teach economics in college? And the way we teach economics in college is exactly the way they taught economics 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You live in a really interesting place out here, by the way, because the UMass Amherst is where all the college professors who couldn't get tenure at Harvard in the 70s because of people like Friedman, they came here and started the economics department at UMass Amherst. And that's why you have this really neat little left-wing economic policy institution out here. It's a really amazing group of people. And they actually wrote some of the reports on minimum wage that I talked to. This is a different thing. I've been working my way through their textbook. It is pretty interesting. They start from a different point of view. Instead of starting from the idea of defining economics as the distribution of scarce resources, they start from the idea of how does history show economic growth? What is the economic growth indicative of? They tie the growth of economics, the sudden rise in economics. They've tied the sudden rise in economic power and the Industrial Revolution to fossil fuels and the use of coal and oil. And if you match up the charts, the same timeline, oil is what got us here. And maybe slavery too, if you read those. But I'll leave that for you. So the future, let's see what I have on the future. Oh yeah, so this is our future. Or this is our future. And I think, yeah, thank you. Anyway, so that's that. I do have some links I can send to people on all the stuff I talked about. I know I flew through this, but I'm eager to take questions and not talk in yabber up here for a while. And I'd love to know what you think, what your ideas are. And I know I read on the meetup page, somebody was saying, I wonder if he'll talk about taxes and some other stuff. And I was like, well, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm trying to go broader than specific economic points, but I might be able to talk about those as well. So with that, I'll leave it open to questions. Yes?
How would raising the minimum wage to $15 have a negative effect on the economy overall?
Well, personally, I don't think it would if it was phased in slowly. I think like $1 a year until it hit that. Remember that if the minimum wage kept pace with what it is now, it would be something like $22. Right? So from when it started to today, if it kept pace with inflation, kept pace with other ordinary increases in the size of the economy, it would be a living wage. It would be $22 an hour. So I don't think it would have an effect. I think what the effect would be is that certain businesses would not be as profitable, and certain CEOs would not be able to pay themselves $300 times more than their low-paid employees, which is what it is. I think in some cases 500. CVS, which is a company based in Rhode Island, is the largest CEO to employee scale. I forget what it is, but it's insane. The CEO makes an insane amount more than the people who work for CVS. It's just crazy. Yes?
Isn't there a claim that Australia, they raised their minimum wage and that's had some kind of net?
Yeah, I've seen that, but I haven't. I mean, when I see the aggregated reports, there's a lot of different reports out there, and I've read most of them. I read the one that took all the reports and aggregated them, and I haven't really examined, to be honest, what happened in Australia. But there's other things in Australia too to keep into account. They have some interesting trade problems, and they also kind of oscillate back and forth in their economic policy much faster than even America does. If you look at the way their prime ministers and their cabinet goes back and forth, they ping-pong all over the place on policy. So it's hard to know what policy was enacted in 1 year had this super big effect on the next 5 years, right? So if somebody comes into power, suddenly the economy looks good, but maybe that's because the guy who was last in power did something, and we're not sure what those are. So that's what I was talking about. Economics is a complex system. And I think what we're missing right now in our system, if I want to get a little Keynesian, is that government has been weakened and can't really support the economy in the case where the economy starts to fit, right? Keynes came up with this idea that when the economy, he knew economies were complex systems of some sort. And he knew that occasionally we're going to have downturns and the economy's going to go bad. So he said when that happens, government steps up, starts hiring, we have like the public works, we have World War II, theoretically, that helped to invest money into the world, and that got us through the downturn. Without a strong government, without a government that taxes properly big business in the good years, we don't have a government that can support the the economy when in the bad years. And so what's going on in Australia, I'd have to look into that more, and I'll bet there's a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas on that. And it's also hard because different economists are all beholden to different strong ideologies. So what one person writes is obviously raising minimum wage causes a problem. Someone else will say obviously investing more in whatever has caused this problem, right? Making a bid for the Olympics in Australia was the problem, or whatever it was. And so we don't really know. Or it could have been a trade deal with someone else in the Orient, because they have a lot more trade there than we do. I don't know what the situation is, but it is complex. And if it were shown, if we did the kind of studies that showed there was an issue, then we would have to look at it and say, okay, how can we accomplish these goals in a better way, right? So we'd have to look at that. But so far, I have not seen the evidence. In fact, it's pretty compelling that, in fact, the opposite happens. There are even some studies that show, albeit small, that when you increase minimum wage, you show some upticks, like is happening in SeaTac right now. There was a guy who complained just before the minimum wage went up that he's going to have to lay off a bunch of workers. He's opening like 40 restaurants. He's not laying off workers. In fact, he's expanding because he's found people who are paid more are able to shop more, and suddenly he's got more customers who can spend more money, right? Those same families that used to be like just living on food stamps and making very little money are now occasionally going out to eat at his places. And he's making more money, he's opening more restaurants, things are getting better for him, not worse. So there's that argument to be made, at least on the local economy, that this has big improvement. I don't know about national, but the way that the economy's been going, I wouldn't blame any small state or even a large state from raising this minimum wage as high as they can go. As high as they can keep going, I'll bet you they'll show a huge economic uptick. This is my guess. I think Brownback has been showing that, or Governor Brownback has been doing some, is it Brownback? No, Sullivan, I'm sorry, he's Kansas, he's doing the opposite. I forget the name of the governor who's doing some really interesting work on raising all this stuff and giving some good.
Yeah, from my perspective, the problem is that raising the minimum wage even to $15 an hour, while undoubtedly it's going to help millions upon millions of Americans, it's really not a solution, because if you raise the minimum wage to 15, by my calculations, you're still making $31,000, $32,000 a year, which in many parts of the country is barely a living wage. The problem is much greater than that. We have millions upon millions of Americans who are living in a state of scarcity. They're working, they're hardworking, they're playing by the rules of the game. They may be making in the low 30s. I know educators, teachers in Miami with masters that are making $35,000 a year, which is abominable. So $30,000, $35,000 a year is simply not going to cut it. So while it's going to help millions of Americans, it's really not a solution. The problem is much deeper, it's much wider. The system is badly flawed, and if you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you really do not have a solution. What most people want as a minimum, they want a good but simple life, and $30,000, $35,000 a year is just not going to do it.
Does anybody have an idea how many people are near or at minimum wage now?
I don't know the exact figures. I know in Rhode Island, for instance, that we know for tipped minimum wage, which is, well, I don't know about that, but tipped minimum wage is usually lower than minimum wage, so it's $9.60 for minimum wage, it's $2.89 for tipped minimum wage. 25,000 people in Rhode Island are on the tipped minimum wage at one count. Mostly women with children, it turns out, too, and their primary care providers for their primary breadwinners for the family. That's just some statistics I saw just recently. I don't know how many it would help, but I also know that there's an inflationary thing, that there are some signs that there are some inflationary overflows from raising wages like that. But inflation for a long time has been given a bad name, and I'll say why. We're trying to hold inflation right now in this country to a zero, or very, very low. But if you look back to when your parents bought their house, right? Now, this is before most farm were very little. Your parents bought a house and they got a big mortgage. Well, let's say $25,000 a time. Bought a house somewhere. That's what my parents did. More. My dad was a firefighter. Got a house, $25,000 a month. Over time, inflation raised the value of his home, but it also lowered the amount he paid. Not really lowered it, but as a percentage of his income, whatever he was paying a month for that mortgage was shrinking. So by the time I was like 10, 15 years old, my dad was paying this mortgage that was half over, it's a 30-year mortgage. 15 years into it or so, he had gotten pay raises, he had gotten, moved up in the ranks in the fire department. The house had increased in value, maybe doubled or even tripled. So now it's a $75,000 house. And the amount he's paying is like still that same $300 a month, or whatever it was. So that was smaller. So inflation actually helps people on the ground, like lower income people, somewhat, especially on those issues. But it hurts banks and it hurts big businesses who don't like inflationary ideas because they feel that it makes it harder for them to sell products, or feel that it hurts them in various ways. But it makes it easier for people on all levels. So inflation isn't that thing. When we hear people say, well, we're holding inflation steady and whatever, we're all thinking, well, that means bread isn't going up, or oranges isn't going up. Well, we know that stuff is going up. We're really inflated, but it can be, I think, in a general trend. If we're thinking of the economy as growing, that could be a positive, not a negative effect for us. And so it's something we should look at suspiciously at the very least. Yes?
I also want to think that by raising the minimum wage, you essentially make it more expensive to sell mass-produced products like McDonald's hamburgers, any kind of thing that can be sold very cheaply under the market value, and that drives out all local competition. Whereas if the minimum wage goes up and they have to pay $15 an hour or something like that, the family-owned burger place that doesn't have employees, it's just, you know what I'm saying, just one guy, two people, they now can sell at a competitive, you know, a competitive burger with like the Big Mac or whatever, and suddenly local people have an alternative to the giant corporate institution, which has up to then kind of driven out all possibility of, or, you know, other people having a business.
I covered the minimum wage battle in Rhode Island as a reporter, and I talked to quite a few restaurant owners who, they tell me they would like to raise their wages they're paying, but they're afraid of the competition that will result from doing that. They feel bad. They work with these people every day. They like their employees. They want to pay them more, but if they pay their employees a lot more, the guy at the street who doesn't pay them more will have a competitive advantage. He will be able to sell his food cheaper, or he'll be able to hire an extra person, or he'll do something that'll erode his ability to compete effectively. So these people actually campaigned for an increase in minimum wage, even though it would cost them money, because they want to pay better, but they're unable to because of the competition in the marketplace. So that's an interesting perspective you don't hear very often, because when you do, the people, it's almost like, I don't know, they're called traders or something from the restaurant associations, which I also deal with a little bit. And I say this with a brother who's a restaurant manager and quite against raising the minimum wage, so have some good, vigorous discussions. Yes?
I like the idea that, you know, every country is running an experiment, every state within a country is running an experiment, so this is kind of scientific in a way.
Yeah.
And there seems to be the ability then to get at some of what's behind these things. Like, you know, people spend more money for free range eggs and that sort of thing. So it could be true in economics too, that if we opened up, if the people running the restaurant that were paying their employees a little more, actually let the public know that.
Yes.
That actually, the more information we have, we may actually move in that space where we want to do better things, and the movement of what we think are the best ideas would go in those directions in some natural way, perhaps.
Actually, that's very interesting. I was at the Unitarian Universalist conference they had in Rhode Island last summer, and I ran into a woman who was working with local restaurants, I believe in North Carolina, a very small section there, but they were issuing letters put on the doors of restaurants for places that paid their employees more. If you paid a living wage to your employees, you got this special thing, and then they would advertise on the website and say, this is the restaurant you want to support. And that meant other restaurants wanted to be on there, and in order to do it, they had to sign a contract with the company that was giving them the letter to meet certain criteria as far as the way they treated their employees economically, and so that's actually a very positive thing. It's something I've talked to local activists about in the past. I mean, as much as I'm a reporter, I'm actually an activist more too, at least on social justice issues like that. I mentioned that idea, and the one thing the guy who was in charge of that told me was that there's only 4 restaurants that qualify in Rhode Island right now, and he's afraid to make himself look too weak by having a list of, here's 4 restaurants he can eat at. It seems pretty paltry to him, so he's a little worried about that. But I think in time we might be able to generate a bigger list of people who want to do the right thing. I know I've talked to more than 4 restaurant owners who want to do the right thing, and they want to do more.
Yeah. My take on that a little is that I have a lot of friends living in Germany, and they tell me that they're very willing to spend more on their food, knowing that it comes from resources that they politically agree with, you know.
Yeah. I see that too. I mean, I live not too far from a very nice little gift shop type place, and the guy pays his employees well, and he imports stuff from all over the world there, and it does really well on, you know, but I live on the east side of Providence, and it's a very nice, ritzy little area, so people can afford to do that. But you know, you go across town to where, like, there are what they call food deserts, you know, South Providence, which is a very tough area. The closest supermarket might be 2 bus rides away. And so people find themselves, like, economically unable to get there often enough to get fresh vegetables. They find themselves buying chips and salsa and the stuff you can find at a 7-Eleven. Now, this is what families are trying to live on there. That's not super healthy. So that's where, like, you see efforts to build community gardens, which is like try to import food or kind of farmer's market come in or something like that. So you see that stuff, it's, you know, and there's ways to work that. All these are really important ideas, and these are really important ways to kind of defund corporate control, which I think is a big problem. I mean, you know, we see corporate, like, working to have the powers of people as far as like, spend money like people, campaign like people. Maybe they'll be voting soon, right? And I don't know how many votes Coca-Cola gets, but they'll get a few votes down there. They got to work out by that. So I would like people, I think as humanists, we're going to probably agree that corporations are not people, maybe. Might be somebody who wants to argue that, but so we want to maybe talk about people power and get democracy there, which is another thing that's fascinating. Yes, back in the row. Gentlemen.
Scientists are neutral, unbiased. They have hypotheses, they explore it, they do experiments. Are there economists out there who are unbiased, who do not have an agenda, who are not libertarians or even...
Yes, there are some new frontiers of economics being opened up. There's psychological economics, there's some interesting stuff being done in like computer. I mean, there's a lot of different work being done. For instance, I mentioned briefly Homo economicus, which is this abstract human being who has always in his head or her head full economic information and always makes the best possible choice in their own favor. And this is the unit of person that they count on all of us to understand all our phone contracts perfectly and to always make the best decision in a moment for the best phone contract we can get. Now, none of us here have read our whole phone contracts, right? Anyone read your phone contract? Because I haven't. Anybody actually read all the stuff Apple or Windows asks you to scroll through before you check yes, accept, I will move on, or Facebook says yes, or well, none of us read this extensive legalese, and yet Homo economicus counts on the fact that not only have we read and understood that, but we make the best possible decision for ourselves based on that. I did not do that on the way here for the few purchases I made. I did not do that today or tomorrow or yesterday. I don't see myself making I'll make what I think are the best possible choices, but they're not with full economic information. I will not know when I walk in and buy a book today that there's a same book down the street for $2 less, and that would be my best decision is to go an extra mile and buy that book cheaper. That's not the way we work. We're not, yes.
How does that even fit in with like notions of advertising and marketing? I mean,
another great, that's what, I just remember Adbusters is the magazine that the Occupy first, the idea of Occupy was first done, right? And Adbusters is all about basically critiquing advertising. Advertising warps that entire concept of a free market by making us want stuff we don't really need or want. And so if that is possible to do, and we all know it is possible to advertise something, we all get hungry watching TV and we see something on TV that looks good, right? Like somebody picks up a big tricky piece of pizza and thinking, oh geez, I'm hungry, I just ate dinner, and I'm just thinking that looks good. So we know this stuff works on us. We know we're animals, we know we're people, we know we have needs and wants that we can be influenced. If we can be influenced that way, then it shows we're not making the best possible decisions in all possible. And since that can be used against us, maybe we should start thinking about how we could make economic theory satisfy at least that idea. How does advertising work into economics in a way that betters us, doesn't hurt us, or doesn't just take our money for needless objects or food? Yes.
Look, I mean, it's always better to make the best decisions, the best choices. But if you're making the minimum wage, or even if you're making $15 an hour, and you make the best choices, you're still going to be screwed. You're still going to live in a state of scarcity. The big picture here is that we've got millions and millions of Americans who live in a state of scarcity. They simply do not make enough money to pay their bills, or to pay their bills comfortably, and to live a comfortable life. That's the bottom reality.
Yeah, okay, but what are you claiming is the solution? Now, you're recognizing a problem, and that's fine, but somebody still needs to get at a direction that you're moving in to something better.
Let me suggest a direction. A direction, because part of the problem is that not only do the big corporations do they not only want to not change the system, but millions of Americans also do not want to change the system. They do not want to move towards socialism or communism or some form of collectivism. Unfortunately, that is the case. So the choice that we're dealing with right now is that we've got a system that's badly flawed, and how can you somehow live with it better? One idea is that you take the idea of Social Security, and instead of starting it at the age of 62, when a person is born, you create an investment bank, if you will, made up of all Americans. And at the point that you are born, a certain amount of money goes into that fund automatically. And you grow it from the time that an individual is born, so that at the time when the person reaches the age of 30, 35, or 40 years old, that has grown into a massive amount of money. That money is then distributed on a monthly basis to that person, the same way that Social Security is. It's not a perfect solution, because then you still have to get through the first 30 or 35 years, and you may live in poverty. But at least at the age of 30 or 35 or 40 or 45, this Social Security, which started at age from the day that you were born, kicks in, and now at 35 or 40, you can escape poverty. And perhaps even more important than that you have the possibility of living a rich life, a life that's not devoted to work, where you can think, that you can be an artist at the age of 40, whatever, you can live creatively. And that's the problem. So many people, from the time that they're born until the time they die, they live this life and they never escape it.
So you're advocating the Star Trek future?
Pardon me?
I said, so you're advocating the Star Trek future?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
You're advocating the Star Trek future?
Star Trek. Star Trek? I don't know.
One of the things I think about that too is, like, one of the reasons I don't come here and try to offer a bunch of solutions, but just ideas and critiques, is because I don't know that we can possibly predict what's going to work. But I do think what we can do is institute policies and ideas, even on a local level, that change the circumstances for people in a positive way. Now, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if anybody here has the ability to change the macroeconomic system of the world, but we certainly have the ability to identify social problems or ideas and maybe move towards things like a more progressive taxation, and maybe higher wages for people, that kind of thing, maybe better labor laws, better protections for people, that kind of stuff. But one of the things to consider is that we're not going to, we can't predict the future, and we're not going to come up with a Das Kapital or something like that explains exactly how the whole system should work, because it is a complex system. It is a lot of moving parts, and I don't think it's incumbent upon us to offer solutions, but it is incumbent upon us to offer critiques. If this isn't science, and it isn't moral system, then we should certainly say that out loud, and just when people say, oh, this is the best possible system, say, no, it really isn't the best possible system. At least we don't know that. Maybe this is the best possible system. Well, let's prove that before we make that claim, and let's make sure that it's science. If there's no way to improve the lot of people's lives on this earth, and this is just going to be an eternal, terrible purgatory for everybody, that's fine. Or for most of us, it's fine. But let's make sure that we know that before we consign ourselves to it. Just buy into it, especially if it's filled, like I said. Economics is filled with a lot of lies. It's a lot of non-science. It's a lot of false ideas. At the very least, they should rest it on real science and real ideas. Interesting people? Yes?
I know people who get their college degree and then can find some level of happiness working manual labor on an organic farm. So I think about 100 years ago, or 200, let's say, you've got slaves, you've got people whose ability to use an axe is valuable, and a conservative economist then and now would probably say it's all okay because we've got a certain number of people who are smart enough to be teachers, but we need them to swing an axe. So I'm looking at the current situation today and saying, do we need college-educated people to sell burgers? And is that the way a conservative economist would see it? And that's one issue. I just want to mention this other issue, which is in the mind of a conservative economist, maybe they say, 100 years ago, you were a king if you had the equivalent of being able to listen to somebody play music. And now, you can see movies and everything for nothing. And I wonder if a conservative economist today would say, it's fine that we have this billionaires and poor people, everybody else is poor, because being poor now is being a king, so who cares? And we're therefore ethical by letting it be a dog-eat-dog world, and the billionaires are there because they've got the chutzpah to do it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think one of the things we've lost is this idea of equality in terms of the original version of, the French Revolution. We talk about equality. They were thinking in terms of economic equality as well, but we've kind of moved away from that. And I think one of the reasons that we've moved away from that is because we want to have striations in society. We want to have people who work and make our burgers, and so that I can go whenever conveniently get my burger. Not really paying attention to the fact that that person might be working 3 part-time jobs, 60 to 80 hours a week, none of which are paying full-time or benefits, and they're all minimum wage jobs. Because the person only works 30 hours here, or 30 hours there, or 10 hours here, or 10 hours there, they're not considered a full-time employee, and they never have any advancement, and they just spend all their time running from job to job to job. And yet, one of the weird things is, one of the requirements for that person is to have a car so they can get to the job. And then the other requirement is they have a cell phone, so they'll always be able to be on call, or be able to organize, somebody says, hey, so they called out, do you need more hours? Yes, I'll be right there. So they have to have cell phones and cars, and yet I get by in my life without a car because I'm relatively well off, and I live in Providence, and I don't need a car. I have a bus line right there. I have other things. I can cheat that system in ways that a poor person would not be able to do so. And I talk to many people who are in terrible circumstances that way. And when I see them try to organize around labor issues, I'll tell you a story. This is a terrible story, and this bothers me to this day. A year ago, the hotel workers in Rhode Island in Providence were trying to organize. And they found out that in the city of Providence, you can get an ordinance through the city council has to consider your ordinance if you get a certain number of signatures, like 1,000 signatures. So they went out and got 1,000 signatures from people in Providence saying, we want hotel workers to make minimum wage of $15 an hour. And the city council had to consider that, had to put it in the docket, had to talk about it. And they then effectively, basically lobbied citizens in Providence so that they had the votes to make that go through. So hotel workers in Providence were going to get $15 an hour. The night that they were going to have the city council meeting, hotel workers from all over Providence made a special effort to find childcare. They bused, or they drove, or they carpooled, or they walked to the city hall to be there for the meeting, so they could be there and make a powerful presence in the meeting. About 100 people showed up at this thing. 2 hours before it happened, the head of the committee canceled the committee meeting. So all these people, 100 people, showed up at an empty city hall. Nobody was there to talk to them. I was there because I was a reporter and I was going to cover this thing. And one of the reporters was covering this issue at all. No one was paying attention to it. It's a labor issue. There was a lot of Spanish-speaking people. So it wasn't an easy thing to cover from a legal speaking perspective. But they canceled the meeting, and you should have seen the disappointment on their faces. They felt completely betrayed. It was a week later that the General Assembly, the state level, passed a law that said cities and towns in Rhode Island cannot raise the minimum wage of their own. It has to be a state regulation. So that basically just gave them the time they needed. If they had passed it then, it would have been grandfathered in. They couldn't have done it. But by delaying it long enough for the state to get their act together, they basically cut them off their knees. They were halfway through the process of getting the extra number of signatures they had to get it on the ballot issue in Providence. If that were to fail, and they were going to get that. They would get those people. And they were going to get their $15 minimum wage, but they would stop. These people were poor. These people make $9 an hour, maybe $9.60 in January when that new rate goes up. These people are working in horrendous hours. I mean, if you have a union contract hotel, you get to clean 12 rooms a day in 8 hours. If you don't, you have 18 rooms to do. And if you have a union contract, you're making about $15. If you don't, you're making $9. So you're doing 18 rooms at $9 an hour. But if you have a contract, you're doing 12 rooms in 8 hours at $15. And that's the difference in Rhode Island right now between hotels. So that's how people who are poor are kept from even accessing the tools of democracy just by canceling a meeting here or there, because the amount of work you have to go through, the money you have to spend to participate in democracy, just to get the time off to do so, is a high barrier for some people. It's easy for some of us, it's harder, it's even hard for some of us. Some of us don't go to city council meetings or this stuff, and I understand why. They're boring. They're made to be boring, I think, on purpose. They're procedure. I really believe they're made boring on purpose. I've been to hearings at the State House in Rhode Island where 100 people will fill a room to speak on a bill. They won't consider that, they have a series of bills to go through. They'll do the bills out of order, and they'll make sure the last bill they do is the bill that the 100 people have showed up for, because they know that people will have to leave over the course of the night. They won't be able to sit out for 6 hours, so that at 10 p.m. they can begin the testimony. Most people leave, and it keeps people from testifying all night, right? So now that 100 people dwindles down to only 20, and of those, maybe 8 people will still have the power to speak and want to speak. And then they'll have 8 people speak, and they can get through it quick. But if they do it at the beginning, 100 people will speak, and then they'll have to do the other bills late tonight. They don't want to do it. They want to do it the other way around to effectively dissociate you from your democracy. And these are the little tricks I've seen. I've been covering this for 3 years. It's just never ends. Yes.
I think we have to consider what values in society puts on particular occupations. I mean, for example, you get $1 million or more to hit a ball with a stick, but you certainly don't get that to educate people coming up who are going to be turned into grown-ups who pay millions to watch people hit a ball with a stick. I mean, the social values are not given enough emphasis.
Right.
I mean, you alluded to air pollution, environmental pollution. I mean, people who are doing the work literally down in the dirt, saving the trees, growing the crops, they're not the wealthier portion of society, and yet they're doing fundamental work without which society could function.
You know, I mentioned Rhiannon Eisler earlier. She wrote The Real Wealth of Nations. She feels, this book here, she feels that we don't value work that is caring, work that women do. And if you look at the way that, what traditionally women do, I'm not going to say women, but teaching, right? Care, nursing, daycare workers, all these types of welfare, social workers, those type of things, right? These are low-paid jobs in our country. Some of the lowest paying jobs in the country, in fact. You can go to school for 3 years to become a nursing assistant, get out, and still be making like $9.60 an hour, be in some places, or minimum wage, slightly over minimum wage, paid $11 an hour in some places. This is the kind of, and again, without a union contract at a certain, elder care home or something like that, you don't get the wages that would make it worth going to school for 3 years. So people don't go to school for this because it's not a career that pays, and so we have a shortage of things like teachers and this type of stuff, right? So you're absolutely right, where we put our money or where we put our concerns or our ideas, caring economics, or life enriching, we should call life enriching activities, or caregivers, life support, these type of things. This is important. I think this is an important part of it. We devalue these jobs for a reason. These aren't banking jobs. The highest paid government employee in Rhode Island, I think, is the coach for the URI football team or something like that.
What?
I believe so. I think I read that somewhere. That definitely one of the highest paid positions in the state is a football coach. Look it up, and your state football coaches make more money than almost anybody you can imagine. They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to coach football, but your physics professor or your history professor isn't making nearly that much. Not even close. Most of that is being filled by adjuncts who are having trouble even getting a union. We have a union for URI adjuncts, and it's they're 3 years they've been working without a contract, and they're refusing to negotiate. This is a public college in Rhode Island, right? It's insane. So we need to empower those people. And as humanists, I think it's important for us to take stands on those issues. And that's another thing that we have to say. It's important for us to take a stand on that and to make sure that we support them. And, the same way we don't really have a problem supporting marriage equality, and we're not personally LGBT, or we're support, say, the broader aspects of the Black Lives Matter movement, even if we're not people of color. I think it's important for us to support labor issues and the issues that these people are having, for sure. But at least that's how I think of my humans. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, those coaches that are getting paid that money are not getting paid that money because of any social conscience whatsoever, obviously. So there are other forces that do this sort of thing, the way the free market functions, etc.
Exactly.
So is there other countries that handle this sort of thing very differently, that they do value teachers in ways that they pay them? And according to this author too, which she must look at this sort of thing to ask that our GDP is way up here and X amount of it is for things that could be considered negative. So if you look at Denmark and Sweden or other countries and ask that same question, how do they handle their coaches and their teachers?
Well, I don't know about coaches, because that's a kind of recent tidbit I picked up in between this. But as far as like teaching goes, we know that like in Finland, for instance, teaching is professionalized to the extent that they have teachers have an awful lot of power in the way they conduct themselves. They would be considered almost like lawyers, right? Where you go in, you're a teacher, you're a professional. You are paid accordingly, you conduct your class the way you want, you're not graded on testing but on student accomplishment, and these types of ideas. That's the Finnish model. We're, on the other hand, trying to turn it into a very cookie-cutter system with our various testing requirements and stuff like that. We're turning into a different form of, we're saying the output is how well a kid tests, and yet how many of us have taken a test since leaving school? I mean, that's not the skill set we need. We don't need a skill set that says, I'm really good at putting those little marks inside of A, B, C, D, or E. I need to real education that says, how good am I as a voter? How good am I as a citizen? How good am I as a productive member of society or somebody who can actually help move the world forward? And those are the tests that we wanted, but you can't, and I understand the idea we want to test knowledge. I mean, testing is important at that level. But if that's all we're doing, we're just training a bunch of people to take tests. I don't know what that skill is. I don't know if that's. I know you're a teacher, but there's probably teachers. There's people who have taught, and I never taught that way. I've taught very seldom, but when I have taught, I don't teach. Yes.
To the Republican type characters there, that's really the explanation that we need to throw more money at teachers is that it's not that simple, and that's not really what you're kind of getting at, suggesting in Finland. They're not just throwing money at teachers to get, but in some ways they are too, right? So.
Well, professionalized, yes.
What you're describing is training for skills, not education.
Right. Well,
and that's what they want.
There's training for skills, and I'm not.
Because then they won't form a union.
Well, that's it, right? They will form a union, absolutely, and they will. Well, I think we want to train people skill-wise, right? We want people to have skills, but I think we really want productive citizens. I never went into a job knowing exactly what the job entailed. But I knew what the job entailed. But I mean, what I'm saying is I wasn't good at any job I started when I started. Even with all the training and all the ideas I brought in, I had to learn what the job entailed and then tailor my skill set to that job as best I can, and then develop myself within that job. That's how we all kind of approach it now. Even if we go to college to be like a lawyer or a professor or something, once we first walk into that classroom or walk into that courtroom, we're putting skills we learn, we're learning as we go in a certain way. As a profession, we say, oh, I'm going to develop these ideas, or develop my skills. But if I go in as a good person, as a person with a conscience, as a person with maybe a historical context, why is it important? Why is it important that I teach these people? Why is it important I stand here and talk about this? These are I volunteered for this one, right? I came here and I did this because I volunteered because I really wanted to have this conversation and I really wanted to do this, but this isn't what I went to school for. This isn't what I prepared for. This is something else. This is a skills. I don't know how to describe it. I'm probably losing that track. Sorry.
Well,
but you know where I'm going, I hope.
Well, the education part puts it all in perspective.
Right, and I think a well-rounded education is important. And I think we're not paying attention to our liberal arts. We're not paying attention. I mean, I want everybody on the factory line to understand at least what Shakespeare was about, right? We want to, at the very least, it'll make the water cooler conversations more interesting if the person's not complete, knows something about the world, right?
Wouldn't it be nice if they had read the contract?
It would be, well, we can do it. I think we can do it. I really do. I want to say also, I'm a weird optimist, so as much as I'm talking up here.
I'm a president of the union.
Oh, well, I don't. What union is it?
Steelworkers.
Nice. We have some, the steelworkers in Rhode Island are for that stadium because they love to build things. But I'm really, and that's the problem, my only disagreement with them, because I say, no, I'm really for building infrastructure, right? You've got infrastructure crumbling everywhere. That would benefit your union immensely if we could get, you know, and I'm 100% about that, so. And I'm glad Steelworkers is a good union, it's good. Cool. Any other questions? I could go all day, so I prepared 4.5 hours, so. That's cool. Thank you very much, that was great. Yeah, email me anytime with any ideas, or if you see anything interesting, or have any sudden flashes of insight, because, you know, I've given this talk one other time, and this was actually I went much better this time. I had a better feeling.
Can you put that slide back up with the economics book, the one with Joseph Stigler?
The quote from, which one, which economic quote or book?
It looked like it was a website.
At the very end, or?
No, it was earlier.
All right, hold on.
It was about a third of the way through.
All right, let's see where we are here. This one here? That one?
No, it looked like a screenshot of a website.
I think it was that textbook you were talking about.
Yeah.
Is it this one?
There you go.
Yeah. I would check that out. Like I said, I'm partway through that. I find it really, really interesting. It's a new way of teaching economics. I'm trying to compare it to an old economic textbooks I have, because my economic textbooks is way out of date, but I bought a relatively new used copy just to compare it. And right off, there are super neat differences in the way they're approaching it. And so it's going to take me, and I signed up for a 1-week economics thing, UMass Amherst, or somewhere around here for August that I'm going to be taking, and I'm hoping to learn some stuff there too as I go forward in this. I'm not an economist by training. I mostly took philosophy in college, but I think of this as, you know, as at least critiquing it. I think this is the way to go. So that's all. That's cool. Yeah, but yeah, check that out. It's cool. Cool.
Well, thanks so much for coming out, Steve.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Yeah, so our next meeting is going to be at Burger King, like I said, it's going to be at 1 o'clock, our regular, the last Saturday of the month. Time to meet up, just